Hello, this is Dr. Christy Patton-Lukes, a chemical engineering professor at Missouri S&T. In this video lesson, we'll be looking at solving Taylor series. We're going to be specifically looking at the Maclaurin series for e to the x, and we'll be doing this using Excel with VBA, Visual Basic for Applications. We have a formula for e to the x. It's just the sum of x to the k over k factorial for any value of x. I've written some VBA code here. Now we're going to go through, and I realize that you probably don't actually know VBA yet. I'm going to have you start by just simply copying my programs and analyzing and diagnosing those. And as we move through the course, we'll have you do more independent work. You're supposed to understand basic coding logic, but you don't know the syntax for Visual Basic in Excel. So that's what we're going to work on for a little while here. Now I've named this sub series function. Now sub simply means it's a subroutine. It's the way you name a basic program. And because I have put two parentheses after the name of the series, then that means it's going to be something that can run independently. It doesn't need someone to give it some call-out values or anything like that. It's just going to allow the program to run. Now we know we're going to need some input values. We'll get to that in just a moment. Now these next lines here, they all start with a little single apostrophe, and then I use that to write some notes to self, so that later when I come back and read this code, I know what it was that I was thinking. And by including the date, I kind of have a better idea of what was going on at that point in time, or maybe what version I was using as things get updated. Or, just kind of, it gives me a better chance at diagnosing the problems with this thing when I try to adapt it for later use that may be years from now. So next what I've got is a series of things that are going to help me find the data in the spreadsheet. So we're going to first go to a sheet. The sheet is named Sheet 1 because that's the default. And I'm going to select that sheet and then select a cell. So the range is the cell name, and it's A1. And I'm going to select that. And the variable value, so x and e to the x, is going to be that active cell, the one I just selected, the value of that active cell. Then I'm going to go to the cell below it, A2, and I'm going to select that one, and in that one I'm going to have the error limit. So this is how many terms do I need. Instead of identifying the number of terms, I'm going to say, what sort of precision am I looking for? Then we're going to put in our formula for our series. Now in this case, I've done this, I've set it up so that we are doing just the exponential function. I start with telling it what to do when k is equal to 0. In this particular case, the first term is 1, and so I just simply say sum equals 1. But if you had something different for your 0th term, then you would put that sum equals whatever that was. Now I also need to do factorial, so I set a starting value of the factorial for k equal to 0 is 1. And now I begin a loop. Now I've got a lower and an upper limit on my loop, and I said 100 because really if it hasn't converged in 100, it's probably got an issue. This will keep me from having an infinite loop, so it's kind of protective. So for k equals 1 to 100, I'm going to first calculate the factorial. So I'm going to take the old factorial value and multiply by the new k value. So it's going to use star for multiplication, and I'm going to multiply by the new k value. The first time it'll be 1, the next time 2, 3, and so forth. And I'm going to place that back into factorial. So a new value for factorial will be calculated based on the previous value. Next, I've entered my formula for the general term. And so that's my variable raised to the k power divided by the factorial. So I have this term. Now I need to check and see whether or not I have gone past my error limit. So if this term, my remainder, is less than the error limit, then I'm already to n plus 1. Remember r sub n, the remainder for the nth term is the n plus first term, as long as it's reaching a maximum at my point here. And so if that term is less than the error limit, then I'm going to go to a new cell, cell E5, and I'm going to put the value there. Active cell value is going to be k minus 1. So I'm going to write to that cell. Notice how I've got active cell value equals rather than something equals active cell value. So this is writing to the cell. This was reading from the cell. Then I'm going to go up to cell E4 and I'm going to put in my answer. So I'm going to tell it what the sum is at that point. And I'm going to set k equal 101, which is going to throw it out of the loop. Trust me, this isn't the only way to do this. If you are a programmer and you're looking at this going, wow, this is sort of a little clumsy and there's some issues here. Yes, there are, and we'll be coming back to some of those later. I'm trying to just write a straightforward program on this case. Now I do need to end my if. Notice I had indented everything that was in that if statement, and then I have my end if that comes back out. And so this all is going to be nested together. My sum is going to be the sum plus whatever my term was, as long as I'm still adding terms. If I have reached my error limit or my maximum number of significant figures I'm looking for, then in that case, I'm going to have already just spit out whatever the last answer was. So now I'm going to calculate what the sum of my terms is. And then I still have one last problem. What if I reach 100 and it didn't have an answer? Well, in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm just simply going to go to cell D3, just a random cell, and type in, hey, this formula didn't converge in 100 terms. And then I'll end my if for this little if statement. And then next. Next means it's going to come back to the next value of k. And again, all of these things were nested inside there. And then finally, at this point, I'm done with my subroutine. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to copy this and paste it into VBA. But let's go look now at VBA. So let's open up Excel. And I need the Developer tab. If the Developer tab is not visible on yours, then you need to add it in. So you're going to come back here to File, Options, Customize Ribbon, and you want to make sure that the Developer tab has a check mark. Okay, so you see it's checked in mine. It probably isn't in yours if you don't see it. All right, so I'm going to say OK. Let's go back to home. Remember I said I was going to put in the X value? I want that to go in cell A1, so I'll put in, I don't know, 1.83. And I want an error limit, so 1 e to the minus 5 is going to be my error limit. Okay. Now I had said that E4 was going to be where I place the value. I'm wanting it to go in here. And I'm going to here put in the number of terms that was required. Okay, so that's going to be where I put my answers. And up here is where I'm going to get an error message if I need that. All right, so I've put in a value of X. I've put in an estimate for my error limit. I'm going to come to Developer, and I'm going to go to Visual Basic. Now, when you get this, you're going to have a Project tab, and you're going to have a Properties tab, and you're going to have this big blank window here. First, make sure where you have this being entered. And I just want it to go into this Excel file. So I'm going to just make sure that the sheet that I'm actively working on is highlighted. Okay. And then I'm going to insert a module. And at this point, I could start by just typing sub series formula. Okay. Notice that it's going to automatically bring in an end sub. I also have the option, since I've already got this typed, is I can just copy and paste this. Now when you do this, what you're going to see is that the comments are going to be in green, which makes it very easy to help, or easy to read this and quickly evaluate when you need help understanding what's going on. The blue are all of its keywords, okay, things that syntax-wise it knows what they are, and everything else is really my work. And now then I want to run this. I've got two ways to do it. One is I could come up to run or push this button. Both of those are the same. And I can run that, but the problem is it doesn't look like anything happened. Let's come back over here to our Excel. You'll notice that it did in fact give me answers. So I had this give me answers, but I had to be in Visual Basic to do it, and it wasn't very satisfying because you couldn't see what was going on. There's another way, one that's a little bit easier. Let's put in a new value here. Let's put in 0.0356. Okay, I don't know. I just chose a small number. It doesn't matter. And I'm going to go to macros because that subroutine I just wrote is now a macro. And if you click on macros, it's going to have your macro in there and say run. And it came up with a new answer. This time it only took 2 terms. Okay. Now there's one last thing you need to know. This is really important. Because macros are how people can write code that's going to, destroy your machine or something like that. The default is that it's going to always want to save your stuff without macros. So if you want to do this, and I'll just save it, okay, I'll just put it there, and save. If you say just save and give it a name, whatever you want to give it, and if you just save it like this, it's going to strip the macro. If I want the macro to still be there when I come back, I need to select Macro Enabled Workbook. Okay? And when I do that, it's going to change my little tag at the end. Instead of being an XLS, it's going to be an XLSX, it's going to be an XLSM file. Okay? So those are the main things that you need to know to get started. You can add the developer tab. You can access Visual Basic. You can copy someone else's program. Maybe you're able at this point to write some programming of your own. And we were able to communicate back and forth from the spreadsheet. So that's enough for today's lesson. Thank you very much.